The announcement crackled over the station speakers, half swallowed by the echo of hurried footsteps and the low hum of 1,000 unspoken stories. She stood at the far end of Platform 6, her fingers tightening around the handle of a weathered brown suitcase. The scarf, deep red, frayed at the edges, slipped from her shoulder as the wind surged through the tunnel, carrying with it the scent of rain and iron. She caught it before it could fall, wrapping it twice around her neck like a quiet promise she couldn't afford to break. She didn't blink much. Just watched. Across the crowd, laughter rose, sharp, careless. A group of men in tailored suits leaned against the coffee kiosk, their voices rich with the kind of confidence born from knowing the world would bend for them. She recognized 2 of them instantly. The way they glanced at her, like she was some old memory they had already decided was irrelevant, made her chest tighten. They didn't remember the small apartment where she once washed uniforms late into the night. They didn't remember the morning she ran on no sleep to care for a man too broken to speak. They only remembered the last thing she said in that conference room, years ago, when her voice was steady and her hands wouldn't stop trembling, "I'm a caregiver." And they laughed. Her gaze dropped to the cracked watch on her wrist, its glass spiderweb from a fall she never told anyone about. It still ticked, slowly, stubbornly, like it knew that being broken didn't mean being finished. She exhaled, breath fogging in the cold. Somewhere above, a gull cried. Somewhere behind, a child asked his mother why the lady looked sad. The suits moved on, boarding their train without a second glance. She stayed rooted, the scarf warming her throat, the suitcase weighing down her arm like a truth she hadn't yet spoken aloud. She could have turned away. She could have left before he arrived. But the wind shifted, and with it came the faintest sound, familiar, impossible. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. She looked up, and there he was. His eyes found hers across the platform, unhurried, knowing. No smile. No nod. Just the kind of look that tells you there will be no pretending, no forgetting, no going back. The train between them roared to life, its whistle splitting the air. Her grip on the suitcase tightened until her knuckles whitened. The watch on her wrist ticked again, louder this time. And she understood that whatever was coming next would change everything. The train screamed past, rattling the metal under her feet, wind whipping her hair into her face. When it cleared, he was still there, closer now, the crowd thinning between them like the tide pulling back from shore. His coat was black, the fabric heavy with rainwater from somewhere he'd been before arriving here. The hem brushed against shoes worn thin at the heels, the leather cracked in a way that spoke of miles walked with nowhere to rest. She caught herself staring at his hands. Not the way they hung at his sides, still, patient, but at the small crease in the leather wallet half tucked into his palm. A photograph peeked out, the edge faded, corners curling. For a moment, she thought she saw herself in it. But the angle shifted, and it was gone. The sky had begun to bruise, clouds pressing low. A quiet rumble rolled over the station roof, and a cold drop landed on her cheek, sliding down to the corner of her lips. She turned away first. She needed to leave. Every part of her life depended on keeping her distance, from him, from this moment, from the version of herself that still believed in second chances. But then she saw it. The way he stood, as if carrying something invisible but unbearably heavy. His gaze was steady, but beneath it there was a hollow she recognized too well, the same one she saw in herself on mornings when the world felt too sharp, too loud. It was an invisible mirror, catching her off guard. Her pulse quickened. What did he want? What did she want? A sudden gust lifted her scarf, pulling it loose, and before she could react, he stepped forward. He didn't touch her. Didn't speak. Just caught the scarf in midair and held it out. His fingers were trembling. Thunder cracked above them. She took it back, the wool warm from his grip. The train doors to her right slid open with a mechanical sigh, the conductor calling final boarding. One step could take her away from this. Away from the danger she couldn't yet name. One step could take her toward him. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice barely carrying over the rain. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes flicked toward the suitcase in her hand, then to the cracked watch on her wrist. His jaw tightened, like he'd seen both before, somewhere he wasn't supposed to be. The rain fell harder, blurring the edges of his face. She searched for certainty and found none. The conductor called again. She didn't move. And neither did he. The rain had grown heavier, pooling in the uneven cracks of the platform. Umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, strangers folding themselves inward, careful not to brush against anyone they didn't know. She clutched the suitcase tighter and took a step toward the train. Just one. The doors hissed open again, the warm light inside spilling onto the wet ground. Her throat tightened. She couldn't stay here. She wouldn't. But then, without warning, her feet slowed. She turned for one last look. He was standing exactly where she'd left him, the storm dripping from his hair, one hand buried deep in his coat pocket. The other. She froze. He was holding her watch. The cracked glass caught the dim station light, making it glow faintly, like a relic salvaged from some place that had been burned to the ground. She reached instinctively for her wrist. It was bare. Somewhere between the scarf and the rain and the noise, it must have slipped. Or maybe, it had been taken. He didn't move toward her, didn't speak. He just held it in his palm, as though weighing not the watch itself, but everything it carried. From somewhere behind her, a man muttered to his companion, "Poor thing, shouldn't linger here. Not safe." The woman beside him replied, "Some people carry more than just bags, they carry silence." The words lodged in her chest. The rain hammered harder, bouncing off the suitcase. Her scarf clung to her neck like it knew she was about to leave. She took 2 steps back toward him, not even aware she was moving. "Where did you?" she started, but stopped. Because the look in his eyes said he'd known about the watch for a long time. Maybe longer than she'd owned it. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve nearby, pointing at them. Why is she staring at him like that? The mother shushed him, pulling him away. She felt the quiet judgment curling around them, invisible but suffocating. To everyone else, this was a scene that needed no context, a woman hesitating when she should be leaving, a man she should not trust holding something that belonged to her. Her chest rose and fell too fast. She could still walk away. The doors were still open. But she didn't move. And neither did he. Only the rain moved, falling between them like a curtain that refused to close. The rain softened to a cold mist, the storm's rage retreating, but the silence between them only thickened. He stepped forward at last, slow enough that she could have turned away, quick enough that she didn't. The watch was still in his hand. "This wasn't yours to find," she said, but her voice sounded thin, uncertain. He glanced at the suitcase. "And yet, here we are." Something in the way he said it made her skin prickle, like the words had been rehearsed for years. She reached for the watch, but he didn't let go immediately. His gaze held hers, and then he said, almost too quietly, "It belonged to my daughter." The platform seemed to tilt under her feet. She wanted to ask how. Why? But instead, a different thought slammed into her, one she'd been trying to ignore since the moment she saw him. The flyer in her coat pocket, still damp from the rain, from the job fair she'd just left. The company name printed at the top. The company she'd been desperate enough to apply to despite every warning. She swallowed hard. You own," his jaw tightened. "You applied for the caregiver position this morning." Her lips parted. "I didn't know it was." He finally released the watch into her palm, his fingers brushing hers like a memory that didn't belong to her. "You did," he said. "Even if you didn't want to." A sharp breath left her lungs. From somewhere deep inside, words from years ago rose unbidden, "I'm a caregiver." Back then, it had been a defense. Now, under his gaze, it felt like a confession. She looked at the watch. The crack in its glass caught the pale light, but now it wasn't just a flaw, it was a fracture between 2 lives she hadn't realized were already entangled. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She should have walked away. That would have been safer. Cleaner. Instead, she found herself stepping toward him, past the edge of hesitation, into a space where she could no longer pretend this was coincidence. The train had left. The platform was nearly empty. Somewhere behind them, a station worker muttered about closing early. He turned toward the corridor leading off the platform. "If you want answers, follow me." And without waiting, he walked away. Her fingers tightened around the watch. Every part of her screamed to leave. But her feet moved anyway. She followed him into the dim corridor, the hum of fluorescent lights above, until they stopped before a heavy glass door. Inside, shadows moved. Conversations paused. She stepped through, and knew nothing would be the same again. The glass door shut behind her with a muted thud. The room was warm, almost too warm after the chill of the platform. Men in tailored suits glanced up from their papers. Conversations faltered, eyes tracking her like a ripple cutting through still water. She recognized a few faces, the same men who had once laughed. He walked to the head of a long mahogany table, his wet coat leaving dark marks on the polished floor. She stayed near the doorway, clutching the cracked watch. He didn't tell her to sit. He didn't have to. Instead, he gestured to the chair beside him. "You came for answers. Now you'll have them." Her voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Why me?" He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Because you remind me of someone I couldn't save." The words landed heavier than she expected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same faded photograph she'd glimpsed earlier. He slid it across the table. A young woman smiled from the picture, her hair caught mid-motion by the wind, scarf wrapped loosely at her neck. The scarf was red. Her breath caught. The girl in the photo was not her, but the resemblance was unsettling enough to make the air between them feel dangerous. "She was my daughter," he said quietly. The watch was hers. She wore it the day he didn't finish. He didn't need to. The crack in the glass suddenly seemed deeper, carrying the weight of years of grief. He leaned forward, his tone shifting. "I don't want a caregiver for myself. I want one for my company. For the people I can't protect the way I should have. I want someone who sees more than numbers and reports." She shook her head slowly. "So you're offering me a job because I look like her?" His gaze was unwavering. "Because you fight like her. Even when no one believes you." Her chest tightened. This was the moment she'd thought she wanted, to be chosen, recognized. But standing here, she realized something else. To take what he offered would mean stepping into someone else's shadow forever. Her fingers closed around the watch one last time. Then, with quiet resolve, she placed it on the table and slid it back toward him. "I'm not her," she said. "And I can't be." A flicker of something, respect, maybe, passed through his eyes. She turned toward the door, the red scarf trailing behind her like a ribbon cut loose. The men at the table whispered, their judgment a faint hum she no longer cared to hear. When she stepped back onto the platform, the rain had stopped. The air was different, lighter, though nothing in her life had been fixed. She glanced once at the watch, now sitting in his hand through the glass. Their eyes met, not as strangers, not as anything else, just two people who had carried silence for too long. Not every stranger you help is meant to stay, but some leave you changed forever. The train station was nearly empty now. The wet tracks caught the dull glow of the overhead lamps, stretching out into the dark like a path she wasn't meant to follow anymore. She walked slowly, her suitcase lighter somehow, though she hadn't removed a single thing. The red scarf was wound loosely around her neck, the wind tugging at it in soft, playful bursts. It no longer felt like a shield. More like a reminder. When she reached her apartment, she didn't turn on all the lights. Just one, by the desk in the corner. She opened the drawer gently, the wood creaking like it had been waiting. Inside, there was a single folded piece of paper. The flyer from the job fair. She laid it flat, smoothing the wrinkles, then placed the cracked watch on top. For a long time, she just looked at it. It no longer felt stolen. Or returned. It felt placed. Her mind drifted back to something he had said, not in words, but in the way he had looked at her when she gave the watch back. Recognition. Not for who she could be to him, but for who she already was. Sometimes love is not romance, it's recognition. She sat there for a while, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the watch face. The second hand ticked, faint but steady. In the silence, she thought about all the ways people enter each other's lives, loud, quiet, sudden, slow. Some to stay. Most to go. And how, sometimes, the ones who don't stay leave the deepest marks. The scarf slipped from her shoulders and pooled onto the desk beside the watch. She didn't put it back on. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The city seemed to breathe again, the streets glistening like fresh ink on an unfinished page. She closed the drawer. Not to forget. To keep. Her reflection in the window was faint, layered over the view of the city lights. She studied it for a moment, noticing the way her shoulders no longer curled inward, the way her eyes didn't search for something they couldn't name. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed. She didn't turn toward it. Instead, she reached for a pen, pulled the flyer back out, and began to write, not an application this time, but a letter. To herself. To remember. When she finished, she left it on the desk beside the watch, the scarf, and the quiet lamp glow. The city beyond the glass waited. Some crossings are meant for trains. Others are meant for souls. And sometimes, you don't know which you've taken until you've already arrived.